Nazi Germany, the German state between 1933 and 1945, dictated by Hitler. The medical profession during this time committed some of the worst atrocities in history by means of science and medicine. Whilst sinister medical experimentation is a well-known fact of Nazi Germany, what is little spoken of is why medical doctors in Nazi Germany at the time had such an inclination to join the Nazi Party. In fact, they were the most overrepresented profession within the Nazi Party. It is a shame this fact is hardly known. In fact, if you do not understand history, you do not understand yourself, and makes one naive of any potential dangers sleeping that could awaken in modern science and medicine. It should be made clear not every doctor within Nazi Germany was a proponent of Nazism, and corrupted to the extent of wanting and engaging in mass murder. As Cater writes, all this is not to infer that every doctor in the Hitler era was perverted to the point of executing murder. Assuredly, the vast majority were not. Indeed, the vast majority carried on as they had before and would again. Those who changed and the forces behind those changes in the atmosphere of the post-1933 horror constitute the exceedingly difficult subject of this book. The automatic equation of medicine with Nazism from 1933 to 1945 is too easy a formula, and obviously will not do in ascertaining the degree to which ordinary medicine in Germany became acculturated to Nazi ideas and, reciprocally, in what strength political ideology and practice under the Nazis became medicalized, even before 1933. Nonetheless, the revealing facts given in this video and highlighted by Cater are bare to see, and the strong link between Nazism and the medical profession within Nazi Germany is intractable. As Cater puts it, during the Nazi regime, doctors of the medical industry became Nazified more thoroughly and much sooner than any other profession, and as Nazis, they did more in the service of the nefarious regime than any of their extra-professional peers. Most people do not really know how an entire society could fall into the hands of National Socialist ideology, yet alone doctors. Even more so, how one man Hitler convinced almost an entire country to support his racist totalitarian regime. This mainstream view is entirely wrong, uttered by both academics and laymen alike. It was not Hitler, one singular man, who convinced an entire country. It was an entire country in unison with each other, with Hitler as the loudspeaker mouthpiece. As Carl Jung wrote of Hitler, his voice is nothing other than his own unconscious into which the German people have projected their own selves. That is the unconscious of 78 million Germans. That is what makes him powerful. Without the German people, he would be nothing. It is easy to assume that Hitler was one evil tyrant holding everyone by strings. That removes any responsibility, any shocking discovery of evil within oneself. Instead, it can be simply all thrown into, projected into Hitler, the man responsible for all evil. In fact, this is almost exactly what the German population did: lose all responsibility for themselves and make Hitler as responsible as possible. With Hitler, you do not feel that you are with a man. With Hitler, you are scared. You know you would never be able to talk to that man because there is nobody there. He is not a man, but a collective. He is not an individual, but a whole nation. How can you talk intimately with a nation? Returning to the medical profession in Nazi Germany, according to Cater, Hitler had no special sympathy for the medical profession. It does not necessarily follow that the converse was true. Actually, representative members of the German healing profession imputed to Hitler a value that accorded with their novel racial view of the medical cosmology. As Dr. Dietrich Amanda, a well-established early National Socialist doctor, put it in 1937, not only was Adolf Hitler a natural genius to have written from scratch such an important book as Mein Kampf, but he was also the great physician of his people. Although widespread support for Hitler by physicians was not entirely the case, the larger the Nazi Party grew, the larger their support among physicians dominated. Indeed, by 1945, 45% of doctors had joined the Nazi Physicians League, compared to 6% in 1933. Additionally, by 1945, 7% of doctors were members of the SS, the state's agency of security, mass surveillance, and authoritarian enforcement. According to Cater, the highest medical administrator during Hitler's reign in 1943, Dr. Leonardo Conti, stated that physicians in Germany had surpassed all other academic professions in the timing and the extensiveness of their commitment to the National Socialist movement. Additionally, most doctors that joined the Nazi Party were not new recruits, and cannot be naively accounted for simply by Hitler's rise to power, but better explained by doctors' own striving for power and the socio-economic conditions of Germany at the time. The primary movers among Nazi physicians were rather recent medical school graduates before Hitler's political takeover who, particularly in the years of the Great Depression, were suffering from professional closure imposed upon them by their older, established resident colleagues and all manner of attendant hardships. They had been socialized in an era of ideological sharpness and had been exposed to an increasing Nazi presence in the body politic. Up to and including 1933, they approached the Nazi camp out of resentment for past and present conditions and in hope of a brighter future at the hands of the predestined leaders. Clearly, when we analyze the period that these doctors were living in, we can say that they succumbed to the Nazi regime most vigorously as a profession, but this does not answer why doctors were so prone to Nazism. Surprisingly, it was not that long ago typical practices under Nazi Germany stopped taking place in the medical profession in Germany, as Cater notes. Sterilization of disabled persons, one of the medical abuses of the Nazi era, was reportedly practiced in West Berlin's university clinic in the early 1980s, and in 1986, when the lower courts were investigating these cases, victims of the original acts of sterilization had still not been recognized as sufferers from National Socialist oppression and had received no appropriate compensation. It was not so long ago then that medical sterilizations of disabled people were still occurring, and it was not ameliorated through an act of virtuousness by the medical industry, but rather the law court's investigation. Indeed, it wasn't until 2012 that the German Medical Association, the coordinating organization of physicians for the regulation of the medical profession in Germany, apologized for doctors being the most overrepresented profession in the Nazi Party and the overwhelmingly horrific medical experiments committed. In their declaration and apology of May 12, 2012, they stated, "The crimes were simply not the acts of individual doctors, but rather took place with the substantial involvement of leading representatives of the Medical Association and medical specialist bodies, as well as considerable representatives of university medicine and renowned biomedical research facilities." For many years, the academic and medical circles in Germany made efforts to conceal the substantial proof of German doctors' engulfing involvement in Nazi crimes and even used tactics to discourage those conducting investigations. The reasons for cover-ups and the length for which the German Medical Association failed to apologize could include protection for the social prestige and reputation of the medical profession, sheer ignorance, and at worst simply evil. By 1933, medical experimentation with an emphasis on eugenics with the goal of cleansing Germany of the inferior humans, for which the so-called superior with their Aryan ideology had begun. Most of the systematic medical experimentation began in large by 1942, continuing until the end of the war, largely done at concentration camps and performed on prisoners. The medical experimentations included the injection of infectious diseases, such as typhus, to test for efficient methods of killing, and the studying of genetics on twins for the purpose of eugenics. Other experiments included the freezing of prisoners with ice water, killing or injuring them, the experimentation of sterilization through radiation and surgery, pharmaceutical experiments done without consent, resulting in death and disability, surgery involving bone and muscles to investigate their regenerative properties, and, additionally, the experimentation of mustard gas causing severe burns and deterioration of long-term health. The most sinister scientific goal in mind during this period of medical and scientific experimentation, however, was the aim to find the most efficient method of mass killing, led mostly by doctors. This medical experimentation was done with a good conscience, in the name of healing, following Nazi ideology to help cleanse Germany of the so-called inferior and disgusting, leaving only the pristine victims alive from the dangerously infectious oppressors of the ostensibly good human beings. What led doctors to commit such acts, and why were so many Nazi members? It is a necessary possibility that certain personality traits of doctors led them to particular kinds of authoritarian and dehumanizing actions. As Cater writes, Robert J. Lifton has more recently specified this argument from the sobering vantage point of the psychoanalyst by divining that, as a profession, German physicians offered themselves to the regime. So also did most other professions, but with doctors, that gift included using their intellectual authority to justify and carry out medicalized killing, which meant practicing therapy via mass murder. It seems that the social status and prestige elicited by doctors gave them a particular megalomania within the Nazi Party that encouraged them to justify killing with their superior intellect. This is corroborated by the fact that Cater discovered that the vast majority of the overrepresented professions within the Nazi Party came from positions of higher intellect and authority, members of the social elite, such as lawyers and academic professionals. Throughout all Nazi Party recruitment periods, physician candidates tended to be mature men and women well advanced in their profession, the only exception being 1938, when the entering doctor's mean age was 27. In this, doctors resembled other cohort peers among the social elite, the academic professionals, and the corps of higher civil servants, whose entrance into professional life was often governed by factors similar to those affecting physicians, such as long periods of university schooling and apprenticeships. Yet not all members of the social elite disproportionately joined the Nazi Party. For instance, other professions within medicine, such as pharmacists, did not particularly join the regime in disproportion. The engineers were remarkably immune to the Nazi beckoning for reasons not yet obvious. Ironically, academically trained pharmacists, who collaborated closely with doctors of medicine, also retreated into the background when prompted to join the ranks of the Reich's only party. The causes have yet to be divulged. This is telling and points to certain personality traits of doctors in Nazi Germany, given that not all members of the social elite nor those who trained in medicine necessarily joined the party in such a force. That doctors were particularly megalomaniac is corroborated factually as well. Physicians were the highest earning professionals in the Third Reich and, understandably, loath to surrender that privilege. The intelligence branch of the SS complained in 1938 that physicians were exerting themselves less and less for the party, which in large part was blamed on their materialistic attitude. Not all Nazi doctors were striving for material riches, however. It was political power that led their ambitions. Most of the men who worked on behalf of the Nazi medical bureaucracy, like the KVD or RAK, had active World War I in Freikorps records and, as old fighters of the Nazi movement, had entered the NSDAP before 1933. They had filled key functions in the founding and evolution of the Nazi Physicians League after 1929 and had tended, particularly in the final phase of the Republic and ever since Hitler came to power, to sacrifice medical practice and professional upgrading to the goals of the movement at large. The high representation of doctors in the SS compared to the SA, also known as stormtroopers, the original paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, is also unclear, but seems to follow along the same lines of the reasoning of megalomania and intellectual pride characteristic of doctors at the time. As in the case of the SA, the SS offered responsible leadership posts to members of the upper bourgeois, but consonant with its enigma and large measures of real power, much more prestige was attached to SS than to any SA posts. Physicians and lawyers considered themselves pillars of a more traditional society, not quite at ease initially with the changes promised by the Third Reich. Hence they craved permanent professional and social security and continued recognition even in a revolutionized polity. Besides the army, the SS was most likely to provide that. Moreover, in the SS there reigned an aura of technical perfection and, at least on the surface, intellectual brilliance, which fascinated these high achievers. It seems, by and large, doctors and lawyers for that matter, were perfectly content with the Nazi Party continually trotting along, as they could retain their reputation and social status. Furthermore, other aspects of the doctor's personality cannot be left unexplored. The high ambition for responsibility can lead to the corruption of power, a position doctors often found themselves in with regards to the death or life of their patients. Doctors, observes Robert J. Lifton, regularly function at the border of life and death. Hence, doctors were doubtless conscious of the SS's seemingly absolute control over life and death, a situation not unlike their own. For centuries, the physician's charisma, indeed his very real powers, have derived from the manipulation of a patient's health, sometimes at the brink of death, impelling the patient to place his fate in the doctor's hands. Similarly, the black uniformed SS leader was a persona whose decision-making prerogative put others at his mercy. For a physician in the black shirt's ranks, death took on a somewhat different hue than it had in the civilian career and even in the military, whose norms followed accepted codes of behavior. The factor of death loomed large in the SS, which brandished a skull as its symbol. Death assumed a versatile quality in that it might be used in a threatening pose. Patients had traditionally seen doctors as professionals who would try to avert death. Respect for doctors was based on this attribute. In a society whose leaders were in the business not only of saving from the process of dying, but also of inflicting it at will, doctors could receive even more respect. This motivation helps explain why doctors were visibly overrepresented in Himmler's elite guard units. Himmler, being one of the most prominent figures of the Nazi regime, serving as the chief architect of the Holocaust, as their head of the SS and the Gestapo. He wielded immense power, overseeing the implementation of Hitler's genocidal policies and managing the vast network of concentration and extermination camps. The requirement in the SS, particularly during the middle and later years of the Nazi regime, also meant that SS members could be called to the Waffen-SS, the combat branch of the SS agency, leading many doctors to find themselves called up to shock troop, frontline duty, and concentration camps, of the latter in which many instances of medical experimentation and torture were conducted. The Waffen-SS also provided doctors with military inclinations a quick way to power and good pay. In the final analysis, why doctors were the most overrepresented profession cannot be merely thrown under the rug, nor clearly can medicine be naively equated with Nazism. The overrepresentation of doctors in Nazi Germany points to the potentiality of ambition to become corrupt, even with good intent behind it, and in combination with intellectual authority provides some of the most sinister atrocities committed ever and within the field of science and medicine. The emphasis on superiority and power striving, characteristic of the Nazi regime, provided a fertile avenue for doctors inclined to the profession for power purposes of authority and social prestige, and corrupted those who could have otherwise been innocent. The personal responsibilities for patients exercised by doctors were corrupted into responsibilities for the efficiency of a regime, as opposed to personal moral striving and self-reflection, providing doctors a good conscience to act in the name of the state, committing atrocious acts under the belief of doing good. Although the personal strivings, personality, and psychoanalysis of Nazi doctors were to an extent depicted here, why doctors were the most overrepresented and most characteristic profession of the Nazi regime is nowhere near answered sufficiently enough. The next video focuses on the historical role of tribal medicine in relation to Nazi doctors and how important the anthropological history of doctors is in understanding how doctors blossomed so terribly well under Nazi Germany. Thank you for watching. In order to keep making videos, we need your support. You can support us and get exclusive content at Patreon and Locals. If you haven't already, check out our Rumble and Twitter page too.